So the next session is on the rise of technology-facilitated abuse, which is a form of domestic violence and provides abusers with a pervasive way to control, coerce, stalk and harass the victims. Joanne O'Connor, Manager of Global Cybersecurity Talent in HP and founder of the National Cybersecurity Awareness Task Force for Ireland, has put together a session on the scale of the problem in Ireland, how pervasive the problem is, the measures in place and the programmes and projects tackling this issue at a societal level. So over to you, Joanne.
Thank you, Owen. This mic is distracting me. I feel like something from Toy Story with something sticking up the back of my neck. So thanks a million. So before I introduce my panellists today, I have a clicker apparently. I'm going to play a short 55-second clip. It's a promotional clip that was developed by the government around domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. It's their zero tolerance policy. And hopefully it's going to situate you all and just kind of get your minds into what we're going to be talking about and kind of the relevance of it. So hopefully this will play. Wants to click and wants to play.
It's time for zero tolerance.
For domestic abuse.
For sexual harassment.
For gender-based violence.
Zero tolerance of unwanted texting, unwanted touching.
Zero laughing off the inappropriate.
Zero tolerance of victim shaming, of being bought or sold.
Zero sexual harassment, sexual violence, rape.
It's time for zero excuses.
Zero being afraid of a partner, hiding the bruises.
Zero not being believed, asking why didn't you say no.
Feeling there's no safe place.
It's time for zero tolerance.
Zero turning a blind eye to mental, physical and emotional abuse.
In our streets, in our homes, in our beds. Domestic, sexual and gender-based violence has zero place in our society.
Okay, so that was the clip. What you'll notice about the clip is that there's loads of imagery. There's loads of imagery of phones, devices. There is pictures of texting. And what they do say in words is zero tolerance to unwanted texting. The only things that they call out by name is physical abuse, mental abuse, and psychological abuse. And what they don't call out by name is technological abuse or is abuse facilitated by technology. And the reason they don't do that is because we don't really have a common word that we all use for technological abuse. We don't have a phrase that we use in our common everyday language to name this. So that's why we have our lovely panellists here today. That's why we've brought this panel to you, and that's why we've called it the rise of technology-facilitated abuse. So what we're going to cover today as well covers two kind of remits. One is inside intimate partner relationships, and one is outside. So you're going to hear both remits from our panellists today. So to introduce them, we have Mary McDermott, the CEO of Safe Ireland. We have Alicia O'Sullivan, the founder of Safety Over Stigma. We have Rosie Coffey from the National Cybersecurity Awareness Task Force. And then we have Liz Dunphy, journalist from the Irish Examiner. So to kick us off, Mary is actually going to come up here and she's the CEO of Safe Ireland. She's going to basically tell us about Safe Ireland for anyone who's not aware about what it is, what they do, and then how their work really has changed over the last couple of years as we've moved with technology and how your work has changed. So I'm going to invite Mary to the stage.
So good afternoon, everyone. And the first thing I want to do is to thank Owen and Cyber Ireland for invitation to present to you today and work with you. It's a difficult room to look at it in one space, but I'll do my best. My second thought is, oh, how I wish the previous panel and ourselves had been melded. Because to a certain extent, what we see this morning from the breadth of the conference is working from a high-level strategic national right down to cyber instance. And now we're talking about exactly the same dynamics on every possible front at an individual level, at the most intimate level possible. So I'm just going to give you an idea of who we are. I can turn on my phone, but I'm most certainly not tech savvy in any way, so I need a lot of help. But I do understand the nature of this problem. And in relation to the actual and the virtual world, the crossover, the feedback loop is huge. And listening to the earlier panel, listening to Donna and Kelly in particular talking about ecosystems, I was thinking, there's a lot to learn. And the first thing I want to say to you is that with regard to threat intelligence and with regard to simulations, if you want to understand the nature of that, speak to a victim of domestic sex, gender or sexuality-based violence, and you'll understand what that feels in an instance. This is not for a company. It isn't you can't walk out of the office. It's unfortunately where you go home. And the other thing I want to say is that in this room, and I'll show you some stats at some point, in this room, right now, there are going to be people who are victims. There are people who are victim survivors. There are people who are victim perpetrators. And of course, there are outright perpetrators. The stats would just say that. So that's a kind of to bring us all into the sobering moment of this room on a very sobering subject, security. I mean, it's the whole meat of your entire conference is around threat, how you anticipate it and how you deal with it, so that we can be resilient, we can remove vulnerabilities, and we don't have to live in that way. And in fact, that we can live free and in a democracy that can thrive on every level, economically, personally, and socially, and politically. And surely, I think we know of all times we're in a moment to do that. So as you can see, we have slightly adjusted our terminology here for the 21st century. So Safe Ireland used the term domestic sex, gender, and sexuality-based violence. That is the particular axis of power that we are looking at. And it ranges across those three terms in various ways. I can't squish in masculinities and femininities because we'd be just overwhelmed. But really, they are there. And they operate in how we form the most intimate households, our own internal identities, how we relate to everyone. And they are the crucial axis of power and control, distribution of resources, and that very, very delicate connection between intimacy and intimidation that so inflects our lives and structures who we are and how we are and if or whether we can thrive in the world. So just to give you an eye about Safe Ireland is a network of 39 refuges and support services around the country, 21 of whom provide refuges, but all provide support services. And I was just listening to Donna there just at the end of the last session, where she was saying, of course, there's a whole string of other things we have to attend to in terms of dealing. It's not just a particular line that we have to attend to when we are looking at cybersecurity. So, for example, in the case of all these refuges around the country and support services, they have to deal with housing and emergency accommodation, which is an extremely complex issue. There is an issue of emergency crisis accommodation, issues of whether one could be safe in their own home, remove the perpetrator, safe and supported, move on, and stable housing. That's just housing. The law, the weaponizing of the methods of protection. And I'd love to have a conversation with Kelly about that, actually. So what happens when you have people, hackers, terrorists, who actually weaponize the very means you're using to protect yourself? In the case of domestic violence, this is a matter of course for us, because surveillance and the extension of control works through the courts and extends through basically pursuit. So there's housing, there's courts, there's therapeutic interventions, very complex recovery, trauma-informed need for response there. And I don't know if that's true for your sector. It may or may not be, but it would be worth having a conversation. The shock, when you realize this isn't a single instance, this is actually an ecosystem. This is pervasive, repetitive, flexible, smart. What do you do? I can tell you, you speak to the domestic violence sector, we will tell you all about that. So I'll just go back to that. In terms of the network around the country, just to be very clear to you, just around 20% of people who experience domestic sex, gender, and sexuality-based violence come forward. Okay, so let's just take a ballpark, 80% don't. Why? Shame, secrecy, silence, stigma. That's why they don't come forward. And our job is, technology, our job is to remove that. And when COVID broke out, from the point of view of Safe Ireland, one of our primary tasks is to say we have to stop the fear and the fatalism. We have to be able to give ourselves the vocabulary we need to be able to speak about it. We all know about it. We all know about it, that we can get off the shame-filled position and start speaking openly about it so we can solve it, because it can be solved. Okay. I just want to run through, that this is not just, obviously, it is not an individual issue. It isn't even a regional or a national issue. It's a global problem. And indeed, during COVID, domestic, sexual and gender-based violence was made an international and, in our case, a national priority, which was of great benefit to our sector in terms of gaining frontage and being able to speak about this more clearly. So just to give you an idea of where we come from in terms of Safe Ireland and our foundations, our philosophical assumptions are, first of all, that this is, and I'm just going to read the second part of the bit, okay, so what's in caps. DSGBV or DSGSBV is large-scale social problem. It has actual and it has identifiable patterns. The coordinates of the problem, from our perspective, are sex, gender and sexuality. They operate and are inflected differently across all classes, all races, disabilities, identities. But the core coordinates are sex, gender and sexuality. It cannot be reduced to poor personal choice nor an issue of consent. Again, just with reference to the wider issue of threat and security, an ecosystem is, as we all know, organic. It has leaky borders, it changes all the time and coagulates in different ways. So the idea of poor personal choice as being the sole focus to respond to domestic violence is deeply, deeply problematic. And of course, what it does is it picks up the weapon of the perpetrator, which is, as you will know, blame the victim. So we need skilled responses for that. I can give you stats and figures. I decided not to just crush your heads with numbers and percentage points and all of that, but we have those figures if you need them, and please do speak to us afterwards if you need that. In terms of DSGB being costly, we did a study with NUIG, with the Galway University, where we estimate that and this resonates with international figures, it's roughly 56 billion over 20-year journey for survivors in Ireland. Now, that's not cost to the state. That's just for survivors. It's extremely costly. It is a keystone social problem, as we see it. It is a personal, a social and a political issue. But luckily, we really, really do. And I have to tell you, and I sometimes feel old and decrepit, but I really think this can be stopped. Well, we are full of hope, and we know that we're at a crucial moment to deal with this in a way with new language, fresh understanding, and skilled responses. And that obviously is a completely blank. God knows what I did. Okay, so this is, think of me in education, teacher training college. I have just failed. It's completely overwhelming, isn't it? Like it is. So I've failed my how to teach the alphabet. Absolutely in a dreadful colours, very intense, too much information. Where are we going? Exactly. That's exactly what happens when you're trying to get out of an abusive relationship. And when each of those journeys are turned in on themselves, the perpetrator shadows you and turns it against you and weaponizes the very process you're using to try and get out, and in fact manipulates those trying to support you. So I will just point very briefly to the four core here. If you see safety, wellness, home, and money. They are the four pathways that we have rested the whole thing on. This is the journey of women and children usually trying to escape abuse. So each of those has a very complicated journey, and again, that's on our website. I am not going to go through those because you need several cups of coffee after it. But really, really, each of these are very intense. They are highly technical. They need support, and they're very, very expensive. So that is the journey. I hope you feel overwhelmed. If I have, I've done my job. So I'm kind of coming to an end now because we have much more detailed, technologically inflected inputs for the rest of the panel. But I just want to repeat what actually I heard from the earlier session. The perpetrator's toolkit, everything, actual and virtual. The core dynamic is coercion. And as I'm not sure if in an international context that coercive control is made a crime here. And we have had several very, very strong and powerful prosecutions. Coercion, the physical, psychological, social, sexual and spiritual control, actual, virtual, digital, and it is all used simply to control and to materially exploit the labour, the psychic work, the care work, to humiliate and to annihilate. Now, this is very strong. I'm very aware of how strong this language is, but I'm afraid it is that strong. And any of us in this country have seen the most harrowing incidents of femicide, of infanticide, of familicide. There are patterns to this. It can be resolved, and we understand the nature of it. But we cannot do so if we do not speak about it openly, with courage, with competence and clarity. We really, really need to do that. Just in terms of technology-facilitated abuse, it shadows every step. In fact, it precedes and shadows all of that horrific journey that the purple pathway, as I call it, it shadows the entire journey. It increased with lockdown. And it actively creates entrapment, subverts the ability to escape abuse, exerts control beyond the traditional boundaries, back to Kelly's reference to, outside your office, think ecosystem. This is certainly true in the case of domestic violence. And we need a skilled, dedicated response. Please listen today. If you have any skills that you can support us with, if you think yourself that you can do something about this, help us. And this is just my closing spot, really, and it's really at the core of this is the toxic sense of entitlement. The toxic sense that you can pursue, that you can own and persist in the control and coercion of another human being for your use, whatever use that may be. That is right at the core of this. And of course, that's a long and deep philosophical question about where exactly, entanglement, intimacy, freedom, safety, all of these things can occur. But I could not be sitting in a better room with people for whom security is a core issue. And I can just anticipate very, very interesting conversations. So what we're saying is, as again, again, the previous panel came up, security threats, threat intelligence, simulation, yes. Your perpetrators this is you as well as us, creative, relentless, flexible and smart. And that's exactly what we need to be able to be to counter this problem. Thank you.
Mary, for that introduction, and again, more scene setting after the video as well, especially in the Respect to Safe Ireland. Alicia, I'm going to jump to you with our second question. You are the founder of Safety Over Stigma. It was born out of a personal situation that happened to you, and you turned it into something really useful. Within 12 months of founding Safety Over Stigma, you ended up addressing the Oireachtas last July in relation to the online Safety Media Regulation Bill. Tell us a little bit about that whole journey.
Sure. Thanks for having me here. And I guess it started April 2021. We were in the middle of COVID, and I woke up one morning to an Instagram account that was essentially purporting to be me, pretending to be me, had taken all my own images and edited them. But then I guess the point of the campaign is there was also images of other women without their faces and videos of other women that were essentially being made out to be me. I guess the purpose of it was to make money. I'm not sure, we still don't know who was behind it, but I feel like at that time I had witnessed a lot of other women kind of experienced this sort of exact situation. And there was also like a link to a pornographic subscription-based website that was all under my name and created under my name and all claiming to be me, which of course it wasn't. And they followed everyone I knew, and it was extremely embarrassing actually, and quite so personal and intimate, because even though they weren't my photos or my videos or of me, you know, it being made out to be me was enough for it to feel like I had been violated, actually. And then everyone you know witnessing something like this happening to you on the internet is just highly embarrassing. So I went to report it, and unfortunately, you know, I just felt quite dismissed when I went to report it, and you know, a report wasn't initially taken, and I was told that what had happened to me wasn't illegal, when in fact at that point in April 2021, following the introduction of the new harassment law in February 2021, which is colloquially known as Coco's Law, it was illegal. So I suppose I, being the kind of person I am, went on Twitter and kind of just told everyone what happened to me. And yeah, the outreach we got for people saying, you know, I've had a similar experience on Instagram or on social media platforms where something abusive or harassing has happened and there's been no way of kind of getting any justice or any sort of remedy or getting something taken down quickly and efficiently before so much damage is done. And then also a lot of women, unfortunately, had come forward to say that there was a huge spectrum, unfortunately, of crimes where they had gone to report it and had similar. So I suppose that's where the campaign started. I felt, you know, it wasn't just me, and there was a huge spectrum of issues that were going on. And a couple of us kind of banded together and created Safety Over Stigma. And I guess it's a place for anyone to be a part of, to support people who are, you know, abused or harassed online. And I guess there's only so much you can do before the fact. But there's so much we can do after the fact, or to, I suppose, for victims of image-based sexual abuse. The most important thing is takedown procedure and getting something down fast and removing its existence. And that's obviously just the cyber side of it. There's so many other ways. But yeah, we then were invited to make a submission, myself and Bailey Lane, who's one of my co-founders, on the new online safety and media regulation bill, which will set up an independent media commission here in Ireland that will create kind of codes of practice for social media companies and kind of things they have to follow to support people if they are, you know, subjected to something horrible online or illegal, literally, in fact. So yeah, we made the submission, we presented, and we suggested some ideas, one of them being a sort of hotline or some sort of system for victims to actually, you know, create evidence of what was done to them. And that was rolled in. You can go to hotline.ie now and basically report anything that happens to you illegally or harmful or criminal online. And we made some other suggestions about takedown procedure and education around image-based sexual abuse. And yeah, I suppose it's only been a year, but I feel like we've done a lot, and we've met a lot of amazing people who unfortunately have been subject to something like this. But it's, I think, a conversation that just doesn't seem to exist in this country and maybe beyond.
Amazing. We're in such a short year for, you know, the grassroots kind of thing that you've done. Rosie, similarly, you're part of the National Cybersecurity Awareness Task Force, and that's relatively new as well, probably within the last 12 months. Why was the task force brought together? Why did you, what gap is the task force filling, and why do we need it?
Okay, so maybe firstly, just give a little bit of context of maybe the supports and services that exist out there. So like our main stakeholders and our benefactors are organisations like Safe Ireland. And what exists today in the video that you showed, Joanne, you could see very much technology. That was the launch of the that long word, domestic gender-based violence by Helen McEntee. That was launched in June of this year, and it's a very serious commitment by government to address this. I think there was 363 million committed to be invested in this over the next 5 years. And in her very detailed action plan, she talks about, Minister McEntee talks about the establishment of an online safety commissioner, which will very much align with the online safety and media bill that Alicia was just talking about. And if we look at, we're quite familiar with this from a data protection point of view. We have the Data Protection Commissioner, and part of their remit is regulation, but it's also providing resources and support, so guidance, messaging, etc., for organisations that need it for online safety. So with the regulation, we will get a lot more tougher regulation in kind of mandatory takedown notices that social media companies will need to abide by, and then they'll need to do it in a time-bound manner or they'll be fined. So that'll enforce and strengthen a lot of that. But what the gap that the services on the ground have in, you know, gender-based violence is actually the support and the resources, the awareness. In this technological advanced world, in the last couple of years, we have things like the Internet of Things being exploited for issues like this. So an example I heard of very recently was a perpetrator is able to control the heating in a victim's home. He's outside of the home, but he's ramping up the energy, consuming on her oil so she runs out of money, and then sweating her out of it, so making it really, really uncomfortable for her. So he's still continuously able to harass her remotely. Another example is a victim who has a tracking device. He's sewn a tracking device into her coat so he can turn up at different places where she is and stalk her, basically, but he's using technology to do that physical act. So there are things like this there that are, you know, complex technically, and the gap for support services in terms of awareness and support and training when they have victims presenting, to be able to help them help themselves. And so that's where we've stepped in, and we're providing that gap. It's very much I suppose maybe let's talk about how the task force established first. So it was some of us who had worked previously. It's on a diversity in cyber project, so we're very much passionate about gender issues. It's also represented by academia, so UCC for myself, UCD, and supported by cyber skills in some ways, and industry. Obviously there's, you know, Trend Micro, we've Hewlett Packard Enterprises, we've lots and lots of support in it. And what we're doing is we talked with Safe Ireland, and we understand it, what support you need from the likes of our expertise. We absolutely are experts in training around cybersecurity. We have a skill set that we can bring to this. How can we help you? So part of the work then, we organise different work streams around different themes, like awareness. And I suppose really what we're doing is we're filling a gap around the awareness and the support before that comes online, and I would expect that to come online with the Online Safety Commissioner. And just to say that the work that we're doing is benchmarked against leading national standards around this. So the E-Safety Commissioner in Australia, they're like 7 years ahead of Ireland. They were the trailblazers in the world. They were the first online E-Safety Commissioner that was set up. They have lots of resources, and part of their international strategy is internationalisation. This is a crime without borders, so they are openly sharing resources with us. We're adapting the resources, we're Irishising them, we're putting the legal framework around them, and that's how we're working and benchmarking ourselves. I suppose I'd like to acknowledge that the task force is purely a passion project. It's nobody's job to actually work on this, and really the motivation is around like the very real impact that this can have in society, and bringing the skills that we have to help organisations like Safe Ireland. And it's a relevance for everybody. It's not just Safe Ireland. I know we've been quite heavy talking about domestic situations, but I think anybody who has children or teenagers, or, you know, like situations like what Alicia has talked about there, like it's relevant for everybody. There's lots in there when you go through the detail of it. It's like online safety. It's actually a relevance to all of our lives very closely.
Yeah, because the task force has, decided to do a 12-month partnership with Safe Ireland, like specifically for this, because like that we saw a gap, but it could grow, do other spaces, other things, which is really great. It's amazing work. Liz, you're a journalist with the Irish Examiner. You report on these stories. You see them up front and close. I know you go to the courts every week. What have you been reporting on in the last year or so that would, I guess, humanise some of this for people? Because people hear a lot of this stuff, it's heavy, and they just can't picture faces or people sometimes. But what stories might people have come across, especially ones you've written about, that would bring it to life for them?
Sure, thanks. Just like to say firstly that some of Rosie's examples I think were really excellent about just showing the kind of insidious nature of technology facilitated abuse, and like they're definitely kind of replicated in a lot of the stories. I'd cover those kind of things. But to begin with, I'm just going to discuss briefly a case. It involved a person who was a serving guard at the time. His name was Paul Moody. And he was jailed for 3 years and 3 months for coercively abusing his terminally ill partner. She was battling cancer at the time. It was a really distressing case. The woman, she said that she contemplated suicide. It was so difficult, and she felt that he was going to kill her. But she said, interestingly, that the most difficult part of it was the impact that he had on her head, on you know, the control that he managed to have on her. And particularly, she mentioned that I thought was interesting, which is pertinent to this discussion here today. I think he had gained control of her phone, and because he had managed to gain control of this phone, she felt that he could kind of see inside her head and could read her thoughts, because obviously, so you know, our phones are such central parts to our lives now, aren't they? Technology has become so deeply ingrained in all our lives and reflects so much about us, and can be used as obviously as a fantastic tool for communication and education, but also in the wrong hands of control and coercion and abuse. So basically, the couple met online, as so many couples do. So their relationship began in the cyberspace, and unfortunately it became abusive. And in the course of the trial, it came out that this person, Moody, had basically messaged her 30,000 times, over 30,000 times over the course of their 4-year relationship. It also emerged that during one 14-hour period, he had messaged her 652 times, I think, which basically equated to one message every 90 seconds. So just bombarding her with messages. The judge commented on how vile and abusive they were. Some of them said, you know, that she told her how that she was riddled with cancer. On another occasion, he went to visit her in hospital and told her that the only reason he came to visit her was so that he could watch her die and bleed to death, basically. But while he was there on that occasion, he videoed her on his phone and threatened, without her permission. She was very sick and she requested that he didn't do it, and he continued to do it anyway and threatened to share it. And it was just another way to, you know, control her and suppress her and push her down. On another occasion, he took images of her naked without her knowledge and threatened to share them publicly. So technology was very much a tool of abuse throughout the whole course of the relationship. But I think interestingly also, it was through the phone, the smartphone, and through electronic communications that abuse was actually uncovered, because she never went to the Gardaí, she never complained to him, to the authorities at all, but he had actually brought up separate allegations against a relative of hers. And it was when, in the course of that investigation, Gardaí examined his phone, and it was through that they discovered this abuse. So it was actually kind of through electronic communications that he was ultimately tried and eventually pleaded guilty to coercive control. So coercive control is a relatively new crime in Ireland. It only became a crime in January 2019, and the first prosecution was in February 2020. So it's one of the relatively new cases. It's one of the kind of first cases, I suppose, one of the early cases of this crime to be tried. But in the circuit court, you can get a 5-year maximum, a 5-year jail term. If the case is heard in the circuit court, in the district court, it's a maximum of 12 months. So the judge in this case said that although Moody's although his behaviour was at the top range of that kind of sentence, because he had pleaded guilty, that headline sentence was reduced, and that's where the 3 years and 3 months came from. And although this is obviously quite a high-profile case, some of you may be aware of it already, I'm not sure, it got quite a lot of media coverage this summer, but just from sitting in through family law court sessions in the lower courts, in the district courts, in very rural courts, I often hear how if somebody's applying for, say, a protection order or safety order, the technology often plays a big part in the abuse that is spoken about in the court. And like one recent case, there was a woman and she was applying for one of these orders, and she was able to show the judge just reams of abusive messages that her ex was sending her, including threats to kill. And with the threats to kill, he'd also send really disturbing video footage of like ISIS members decapitating and executing prisoners, and kind of insinuating that that's what he was going to do to her. Really distressing stuff, and the order was granted in that case. So I suppose technology also helped the judge to be able to make a very informed decision on what was actually going on in their relationship. But then just lastly, moving away from kind of intimate partner abuse, because obviously abuse affects so many people. And there's also big problems around kind of trolling of people and, you know, abuse by people that you don't know. So I was interviewing the Minister of State for Disabilities recently, Anne Rabbitte, and she was saying that abuse of people in politics, but particularly women in politics, she feels is so intense that basically her children will not pose in photos with her anymore, because when they have in the past, those images were basically taken from online. If they were posted on Instagram or wherever, they were taken from online and co-opted into abusive memes, so that the family was all embroiled in then, which was obviously distressing for all of them. But she also said that, like, she entered politics at the age of 40, so, you know, an adult, a fully grown woman. She's described herself as being a tough old bird at that stage. You know, she wasn't one to be easily intimidated. And yet she said that the abuse is so extreme and toxic and damaging that it's made her consider, you know, removing herself from politics, from political life many times. And she said that she's heard of other female politicians frequently saying similar. And there was a study done recently by a Dr. Ian Richardson, and he found that basically female local councillors, they received 8 times more abuse on Twitter than their male counterparts. And then when that went up to the Seanad, female senators got 3 times more abuse than their male counterparts on Twitter. And then he found that at the TD level, that kind of evened off, and both male and female TDs got a horrific level of abuse online. And and he did mention that we need more wide-ranging studies to kind of like solidify data on that, but they were his findings from this one study. And, you know, I think that really speaks to the chilling effect that online abuse can have on people entering politics, people entering public life, on, you know, sticking their head above the parapet and trying to change things for the better. And, you know, particularly I think women and minorities, like, what kind of impact is that having on our democracy? I think it's a question that we all need to ask. So that's just a basic run through of some of the many cases that there are out there. And obviously technology is a fantastic tool for so many things, as I mentioned earlier, but there's definitely a need for the online safety bill, which you were talking about earlier. And yeah, there's a need to have more regulation within that space to make it safer for all of us without losing our freedom of speech, making it a safe space so we can all have our freedom of speech online, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and not be abused. Thank you so much. That was just, it's so good. It's so good to just really hear the stories. Like, and even though I've heard them before, and I read that when it was in the paper, and I know we talked about it on a webinar on International Women's Day around it as well. But even hearing it again, it just does humanise it, hopefully, and for other people here, just to make you realise that it's not. You know, we can kind of minimise it and trolling and, you know, people on Twitter and stuff, but it's not. It's not when it gets into your head, like. Alicia, back to your safety over stigma, like that, we're dealing with it, but I think we need to get back to education and awareness, and I know that's part of your future plans for safety over stigma, especially around legal literacy. So, like, we have the laws, like you mentioned, there's Coco's law, but if people don't understand what that is or what it means to them, or what they can, you know, that they know that, you know, something is illegal. So what are you doing around that space for education and awareness?
Yeah, well, I guess it just goes to show, you know, we have some of the most progressive image-based sexual abuse laws in the world, actually, and it served me no good, you know. So I think that's fundamental, aside from, you know, the cyber aspect and the social media companies and, like, the political governance of all of that side. It's also super important that we as users and as individuals are aware of our rights, what we can do and what we can't do, and I guess as well as young people, because I think that's the stage where you have to, with the first time you start getting a phone, understand the impact of your online behaviour, and I guess, yeah, understanding really what you're doing online and what that can mean, because I suppose I was talking to someone earlier and being like, there's a lot of things we see online that we swipe past and we maybe don't blink an eye to, whereas if you saw it happen in person, you'd probably stop and stare. So I think that's really important, and for us, it's about, I suppose, what we're our next step and what we're hoping to do is to create an educational training program for second level students on the younger end of it, about cyber safety, about being online, about image-based sexual abuse, about the impact of that, about finding help, about being able to talk about these things. Because again, I think it's something that we just don't talk about enough, and it's swept under the rug, and it's a conversation that people are just too uncomfortable to have. And that's why we're called Safety Over Stigma, because that's ultimately what we're about, you know, making sure that we just say to hell with that. It's about people's safety and particularly young people's safety online, because unfortunately this is like the bullying and the harassment, and that side of it is very common, I guess, when you're a teenager or in college years. So that's what we hope to do, and I suppose it's a case of understanding that, you know, we can have all the laws in the world, but without the education and training, and also I suppose training. When I say training, I don't mean just for us as users, but I mean for people who are in authority to understand, you know, that how to behave when a victim comes forward, and how to facilitate that, and how to support them appropriately and put them in the best position they can be in then to find a remedy or to, you know, I suppose live through that experience that unfortunately they've been subject to, and support them the best we can. And that's not just for people in authority, that's for essentially everyone in society. So I suppose that's what we're attempting to do, but it's a big job.
Yeah, and you mentioned there the you know, people who are responding to it, which leads me in perfectly. Thank you very much for that. Great segue. So the task force, Rosie, have been working for about 9 months now, I think, creating a huge amount of resources in partnership with Safe Ireland. A lot of it is geared towards frontline workers. It is about responding. What exactly have they been doing for the last couple of months?
So exactly. So like, I think a lot of what we're talking about here is like regulation, and I see, you know, regulation, we talk about the law, and the laws for that's really around protection. But when we're talking about the supports for awareness, it's around, you know, really targeting prevention before it gets to that catastrophic level that Mary was talking about at the beginning. That's why it's so important around awareness and understanding the red flags before, you know, it becomes something a lot more serious. So just on that red flag, so I think anyone around Cork might have seen a billboard campaign that was ran in partnership with Cyber Awareness Ireland and Cyber Skills, which was a Red Flags Are Abuse campaign, and it was an online campaign as well. So on that there was maybe 3, you know, prevailing themes around persistent messaging, location-based abuse, so like, you know, tracking devices, and you know, trying to control somebody's finances. So that was a billboard campaign. Today is a very proud day for everybody who's been working part of the task force. We've developed a physical booklet and an online booklet. This is intended and designed for frontline workers in domestic violence, but it's also really relevant. If you go through it, it talks about like indicators of like what is technology facilitated abuse, what might signs of technology facilitated abuse look like in a domestic violence setting, but then critically, how can you help yourself? What are the steps that you can do? How can you make a plan? And, you know, looking at safety first at all times. So there's really a lot of resources in there. It's really well developed, and it's really, so that's been launched today. That can be made available. But as I said, I think there's relevancy here for domestic violence and frontline workers, but also any professional frontline workers. There are other cases where you could have somebody who's reporting to you, who's talking to you about this, and it's really important that they're signposted in the right direction and dealt with sensitively. I want to also talk about, you know, HPE, Hewlett Packard Enterprises have created a specific cyber essential skills webinar and targeted for Safe Ireland, and we have Trend Micro, who I think we've called them like 52 macro modules, which are really tiny, actionable informational videos, again, supports and help for people who are working at the front line, helping people tactically, informationally, how to do something on their phone, how to make it more secure. And I suppose what we're planning for the future is working with our colleagues in University College of Cork and developing an accredited online course that's a lot more detailed. We're benchmarking this, and we've got, you know, with our colleagues in eSafety Australia, government resources, and that's going to be work that we're doing over the next couple of months. This is very much kind of leading on from what Alicia is talking about there. There's many people might have heard here about a bystander intervention program, which is you know, around physical safety. So this is maybe a little bit similar in the digital world. So there's that's what we're planning to do over the next, I suppose, that keep us busy for the next 6 months at least. So I suppose it's probably just a good example, and maybe referencing Cyber Ireland, like when you bring, you know, industry, academia and government together, it's really amazing the work that can be done and how creatively we can address some of the problems that are out there.
Yeah. And I know, because as part of the task force similarly, I know we've definitely used some of the networks that we've been introduced to by OWN and Cyber Ireland, and that has actually genuinely facilitated it a lot faster in a positive way, positive use of facilitation. Mary, to close us out, there's loads of work being done, Safe Zero Stigma with the task force. It's a heavy topic and it's a bit tough, but are we hopeful for the future of where we go from here?
Yes, bizarrely, I'm always hopeful. It's very strange, but I genuinely am. And the work of the task force for over a year, or just coming up on a year, has been amazing. And all the contributors and part of that team have been generous and skilled and really listening. There's just one, and again, it's going back, funny enough, to the previous session, and it is really around this awareness of threat intelligence or simulation, all these wonderful war game scenarios. From our point of view, we look at this axis of power of sex, gender, and sexuality. That is the axis of power. Sorry, people, that's it. So we can't kind of shy away from that. But right in the heart of that is a fundamental metaphor. And the metaphor is we teach boys to game and we teach girls to be game. Now, in this room, I do not need to extend any lectures on what that means. Gaming is a core part of all this. And it also goes to where people feel, oh, but I was just, or oh my God, I'm cornered. So I think there's lots and lots of conversations we need to have with people like yourselves, with the skill sets you have. And crucially, as Rosie was saying there, it is really about upskilling people who are being pursued, who are being abused, who are being coerced, to act on their own behalf. Alicia, safety over stigma, spot on. Thank you very much.
You take the stage.
That's great. Thanks very much to our panelists.